Two and a Half Admins, episode 199. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, just a quick reminder that next week is episode 200, and we're doing a free consulting special. And it's not too late to send any questions to show@2.5admins.com. And like I said last week, they don't necessarily have to be about the same stuff that we normally talk about. So do send them in. After you die, your Steam games will be stuck in legal limbo.
If this comes as a surprise, I don't know where you've been hiding for the last 10 years, because it turns out you almost never own anything digital. You just have a usage certificate, essentially.
Yeah, and that comes up a lot. But I kind of wanted to use this story as a jumping off point to talk about a bunch of related pieces to this, because not all of your rights are just going to evaporate like the ones to your Steam library. And maybe some planning about how you deal with those things is in order. You know, in the olden days, the idea was always that you would have some passwords or access to your password manager or whatever available to your next of kin in case you were, if you pass away or just incapacitated, someone else would be able to get in to do things like pay your utility bills or access certain information that you didn't want to be lost forever when you pass away or were incapacitated and so on. But now with MFA and things like that, it turns out it might be a lot more difficult to actually, even on purpose, give someone access to those accounts, because it's going to assume that they can unlock your phone and that your phone continues to have service. Whereas depending on how long you're incapacitated, maybe your phone service ends or whatever. And then how do you continue to give access to somebody, even if they have your device, to get through 2FA?
Which is a great excuse for me to jump on one of my favorite hobby horses and recommend to everybody, plan for catastrophes before they happen. Practice your failure recovery modes before you need them in anger. So, you know, if your plan is for your spouse to pick up the reins of your business and, you know, hand crucial information back over to your clients, or just be able to get it data that is wherever you have it, that normally you're the one that gets to it and your spouse is not, like, practice those things. Just take a day and be like, you know, okay, I'm dead. Get into my stuff. Use these policies and procedures that, you know, I've got in, you know, my death folder in like our little, you know, Strongbox or whatever, and see if it works. See if you can do it. Find any problems.
You're saying test your backups, Jim?
I am absolutely saying test your backups. In this case, you're asking your spouse to test their backup of you. And if you're doing it right, you're going to find any number of things that absolutely did not work the way you expected them to. And this is your only chance to figure that out, because when it happens for real, you won't be there to help.
Yeah, even just, you know, when I had problems with my gallbladder and was in the hospital for a little while, it's like, oh, can you go log into this? It's like, oh, it's going to send me the authentication code, not you. And if I'm not available, then you're not going to be able to get in. And most MFA stuff has some recovery codes or whatever, but usually you get very few of those, like 6 or something. So you have to make sure when you're testing them that you also regenerate new ones and make sure that you have the latest ones and that you have all of the codes in the right place, sorted in a way that the person is going to be able to find the right one to get into the right thing and know which ones have already been used.
And the person who gets in with that temporary scratch code that you only have a handful of needs to know that part of their procedure is immediately regenning the MFA to their own device, because otherwise they'll run out of those scratch pads. And once you run out of your scratch codes, it's too late. It's over at that point.
Yeah, and it's just something that, again, if you set this all up a while ago, but haven't been testing it, like Jim says, then you'll realize that, oh, almost everything takes 2-factor now. And that's really tied to a specific person or device. And, you know, part of this can just be, okay, pretend my phone broke. Can I get into all my stuff and reauthorize it on a second device? Let alone can my loved ones actually get into stuff?
Honestly, I'm kind of ashamed that neither Alan or I have made that point to our listeners before now. Yes, that is a failure scenario you should absolutely be ready for, and you should practice if you haven't. What happens if I don't have my phone? Try to get through a day without using your phone to unlock things and see what happens. If you can't do it, well, then you're going to need to fix that, because at some point in the rest of your life, you will absolutely lose or break a phone.
Yep, it happened to me fall of 2022. I left my phone on the airplane when I got off the airplane. I realized when I went to use my phone to buy a train ticket to leave the airport. But at that point, I'd already gone through customs and everything, and it wasn't possible to go back and get my phone. I got very lucky that even after getting refused the first 2 times, found the right person at the airport who could call the right person at the gate and rescue my phone. And I only had to wait around 2 hours to get it instead of going through my whole trip in a foreign country without my cell phone.
Oh, no, that wasn't even on the way back.
No, that was on the way there.
Oh.
Yeah. So I left it on the airplane as I got off in the foreign country. But then there are other things to think about, especially a lot of us have contributed stuff to open source. Do we have some kind of copyright assignment to maybe give our rights to that code away to a foundation or something that's the project entity for something? So that if in the future they do need to change licenses on something or whatever, that they actually have the authorization to do so. If you remember back when like OpenSSL changed their license, they had to try to reach out to every person who'd ever contributed any code and get their permission to change the license. That was rather difficult for the people who had passed away or just changed their email address and weren't the same person anymore or whatever. There was a lot of kind of pseudo-anonymous contributions to OpenSSL that made things quite difficult. But all these things to think of. And we've had this happen in the FreeBSD project. Very recently, there's one that brought this subject to mind. But a couple of years ago, when a kind of reclusive developer who lived in Australia passed away, after a while, his family's like, we need someone to go through his computers and like figure out what some of this stuff is. And like, he's got all this code that he wrote that maybe somebody should have, but it only exists on his machines and his backups, and we're not sure what to do with it. It's like leaving some instructions would have been very nice.
The copyright assignment thing is particularly interesting to me, and it occurs to me that I haven't thought through that as fully as I probably should have. Alan and I have very different plans for, in the event of our unexpected death. Alan has plans for continuity, whereas I have plans for like, no, if I die unexpectedly, I'm gone. My wife will not be able to help you with any passwords or whatever. So like I just work instead to make sure that clients have the minimum viable amount of information, at least, about their systems in order to find, a new consultant who can get up to speed on things and help them in the event of my death. And the reason for that is because that avoids introducing an unnecessary potential security liability. Like for everybody that you give access to everything that you have access to, well, that's a new avenue for compromise. And so I elected to avoid that by saying, no, I'm very deliberately like when I die, I'm dead and all this stuff goes with me. However, the point about people being to reach out about wanting to do license changes and, needing your okay on it because you're one of the contributors, I think it would be nice to give Janice, my wife, like the ability to, like if somebody reaches out to say, yeah, that seems legit. I think Jim would be okay with that. If he were still here, you may do that, or to be able to say, nah, it seems iffy, pack sand. And, if she doesn't get one of those things exactly right, it doesn't have the same kind of security implications that I'm, so paranoid about with my client-specific proprietary information. The other thing is that as far as like my own software projects, the first thought is, well, the copyright doesn't really matter because I don't have contributor license agreements. So no matter what, if you wanted to change the license, you would still have to go through that round robin of find every community contributor and get their okay with it. And nothing about my death is going to change that either way. However, the copyright is still important because if you don't control the copyright, well, then you can't do anything about copyright violations if somebody is violating your license later. So while it wouldn't prevent anybody from continuing to use Sanoid and Syncoid after my unexpected death, it could eventually become an issue like if there is somebody just straight up steals it, just wraps it directly into a proprietary product, which wouldn't be the first time. But, it does so in like a really massive way that threatens to undermine the success of the community project. Well, if nobody alive controls the copyright, nobody can fight back.
Yeah, there's that whole thing. And, why I was looking at, all right, all my contributions to FreeBSD get reassigned to the FreeBSD Foundation when I pass or something like that. But also even just more practical things like, does anybody else have access to the GitHub, right? Have we defined a GitHub successor? So if I die, somebody can cut a new release of Sanoid or move the official one to a different namespace or something rather than 4 different forks pop up and the community has to try to figure out which one's the most legitimate or something. GitHub does have a successor thing, right?
They do, but that's another one of the ones that I'm kind of about, because like once you designate a successor, you have made it very easy for anybody who controls that account to take over your project. And it's not that hard to find people that I trust, but it gets a lot weirder when you're like, it's not just do you trust that person to have good intentions? Do you trust that person to add no additional security risk beyond you having access to those things? And like, well, that implies I need to find somebody who's not just as good at security as I am, but way better. Because even if they're exactly as good at security as I am, but they're them and I'm me, well, we just doubled the potential avenues for compromise there.
Well, I think specifically the successor thing requires proving to GitHub that you're dead before the access actually works.
And how much do you trust GitHub to
Yes.
really dot every single I and cross every T for that, as opposed to just getting some random blurry JPEG that looks like a death certificate and going, yep, looks good. Here you go.
This week, I saw the number of websites that will hallucinate an obituary about somebody who just passed away just to try to get you to pay them for a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or if that other guy, Jim Salter, who works for AP in St. Louis, if he passes before you, then they can just get his death certificate, and that'll probably convince Microsoft, won't it?
That would absolutely convince them, actually.
I remember how hard it was just to get Facebook to memorialize my grandfather's page so it would stop inviting people to send him birthday messages after he passed, because that was awfully traumatic for some of the people.
I'm honestly not sure GitHub has even made the faintest effort to know enough about me to not just accept any random death certificate for any random Jim Salter. And let me tell you what, there's a lot of people on the internet who clearly don't understand this, but that is a very common combination of first and last names. There are a lot of Jim Salters out there. It's not just me and the Associated Press guy.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Tailscale. Go to tailscale.com/25A. Tailscale is an intuitive, programmable way to manage a private network. It's zero-trust network access that every organization can use, and with Tailscale's ACL policies, you can securely control access to devices and services with next-gen network access controls. Loads of the late-night Linux family hosts use Tailscale for all sorts, including controlling 3D printers, remoting into their relative systems for support, controlling Home Assistant, and sending ZFS snapshots to off-site backup locations. I got it set up in minutes, and you can too. So support the show and check out Tailscale for yourself. Go to tailscale.com/25A and try out Tailscale for free for up to 100 devices and 3 users with no credit card required. That's tailscale.com/25A. So on your advice, Jim, I bought some EAP225, the TP-Link access points that are on my ceiling in various places. And they have been absolutely brilliant. I can get near gigabit speeds if my phone is pretty close to them, which is very impressive. And I've had no problem at all moving between rooms. I just set each one to have the same SSID and password, and it seems to roam pretty well. However, that only applies to my phone, which is a pretty stock Pixel 7, and all of my laptops that run Linux. My iPad just does not want to stay connected. And weirdly, my wife's phone, which is a OnePlus 6 running Lineage, has the same problem. And also recently, after discovering how easy it is to set up a guest network, which blocks access to all 192 addresses and stuff, I connected Windows to it and had the same issue. That was Windows 11. So I personally am fine, apart from my iPad, which is a bit annoying. Oh, and also my Mac running macOS, but not running Asahi Linux. So that's a great test case for this. So I don't understand. I'm streaming YouTube or whatever, and then it'll just stop for a bit, and then it looks like it's connected, and then I try refreshing, it doesn't seem to be connected, and then 30 seconds later, it connects again. Now, we have briefly talked about this off air, and I don't know if you two are going to have the solutions for me on this. So this is kind of one to chuck out to the audience, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to have the answer for that one. I haven't seen quite the issue you're describing. Now, what I have definitely seen with iOS devices specifically is they tend to have a really bad problem of sticking to one access point and not wanting to roam even when they get like way out of range of that access point. And you wind up having to like manually disconnect the device and reconnect it to the network, at which point it will promptly connect to the access point it's right next to instead of the one halfway across your house. That's not something that you actually can fix on the AP side when you have that problem. You can't fix it because the way that the Wi-Fi protocol works, unfortunately, is the client itself is in full control over which access point it connects to. Now, there are workarounds for that. One that used to be very popular, Ubiquiti used to, and it's still at least an option. Ubiquiti access points can be configured to actually send a disconnect packet to any device that it wants to roam to a different access point. And the disconnect packet forces the device to disconnect from the network. And any Windows machine, any Linux machine, any Android device, when that happens, when they receive that disco packet, they will just immediately reconnect. If they see an access point with good strength under the same SSID, they don't ask for any information from you. They just instantly reconnect. When they do so, they'll hop on the closer AP. Everybody's happy. For whatever reason, iOS devices don't do that. They just stay disconnected and they sit there stupid and not on the network until you manually say, reconnect me. Joe, are you using a controller at all, or did you just set up all of your APs and...
That's what I was going to ask, because I have exactly the same EAP 225s, the AC 1350s, 3 of them in my house with a controller, and I have a MacBook, a Windows laptop, a FreeBSD laptop, a FreeBSD desktop, my Android Pixel 6, my wife's got an iPhone, and none of them have any problems. Like, I think I've covered all of the devices except for an iPad that Joe has without any issues like this.
So, Joe, do you have a controller, or did you just set the 3 access points up individually with the same configs?
The latter. I don't have a controller. I just set them up with the same config.
Okay, so they shouldn't be issuing disconnect packets then, because that's something a controller will do to try to force roaming. It might still be worthwhile for you to set up a controller, whether it's the relatively cheap hardware controller, runs about $80 over here.
That's what I did.
Or whether you set up a virtual machine and just install the Omada controller on your VM, which can be Linux or Windows, whatever. Because the thing that you'll get if you have the controller that may still be helpful here is you will get the 802.11k, I believe it is. Basically, an access point cannot actually tell a client, you have to disconnect from me and connect to this other access point on my network. But what it can do is issue an 802.11k status report and say, the conditions are much better on this access point over here, real close to you, and hopefully the client will listen and then connect to that one. Something like that might or might not mitigate the issues that you're seeing.
I think it's definitely worth a try, but it is worth keeping in mind here that I'm not moving around here. I might be lying in bed with my iPad, or I might be sitting at a table with my MacBook.
I do understand that, and that's one of the reasons that I'm, being so weaselly about this and saying this might mitigate it, because that's exactly what I mean. It might. I don't know, but it seems entirely possible, and especially because like you're seeing problems that neither Alan nor I have seen, and Alan's just got the one network. I've deployed quite a few network of these things with all kinds of client devices on there because I and my family aren't the only ones using them. My house is actually still, Ubiquiti UAPs. So it might be worth giving that a shot. Now, I have done a couple of multiple access point deployments, like, in people's houses with like 3 APs where I did not set up a controller, and I did the same thing you did. I just used the web UI and set up the same Wi-Fi SSID on all 3 of them, and that's worked well for those folks as well, which unfortunately brings us right back to like, well, I don't know the answer, but like, here's one thing that might be worth trying that's not that hard.
Yeah, I remember there was some special settings I did, or extra option I can enable when I had them linked together to make more seamless roaming. But the 802.11k thing that Jim mentioned is something I hadn't read about before, but reading the way the protocol operates of literally access point detects the client appears to be moving away from it, informs the client to prepare to switch to a new access point. This makes the client request a list of nearby access points. Each access point gives a site report, in which case the one that you're moving away from will purposely say, I'm kind of busy, maybe talk to someone else. And then the client moves to the best access point based on those reports. Maybe the thing that will allow those devices to stay, your iPad to decide to move gracefully instead of continually trying to talk to that one that it was on before that's like just barely in range kind of thing.
Yeah, because the other thing about it is, Joe, have you messed with your power levels at all on your access points?
Yeah, turn them all down to the minimum.
Okay, which is the right call as long as you've got good strength everywhere, to one access point everywhere in your house. Then yeah, you want that power level as low as possible, because that will also encourage roaming when you should roam, and it will discourage devices from just randomly connecting to an access point across the house when there's one right next to them, which you really don't want. It's unfortunate that you can't really firmly control that from the access point side of things, but again, the way the protocol is designed, 802.11 just it really makes the client the boss in everything. And the 802.11k stuff, like, that sounds really great. I will tell you, in practice, there are an awful lot of clients out there that do not honor 802.11k, or it just wasn't implemented properly or well. But still, it's a thing to try. And it sounds like you're having more of a problem with something trying to get too fancy rather than something not being fancy enough, if that makes sense.
The one other thing I might say, especially on the iPad, there's a setting in iOS to control if it randomizes the MAC address or not. It's mostly about if you tell it it's your home Wi-Fi, it'll stay as the same device. But if it thinks you're at a Starbucks, every time it reconnects or every so often, it'll just change its MAC address. And that might, telling it, no, this is my home network, it's okay to not be anonymous here, might also improve things.
That is an excellent point. And you know what else has that setting these days? Windows.
Mm-hmm.
What about macOS?
I believe macOS also randomizes MAC addresses.
Right. I'm definitely going to try that, and I'm definitely going to try this controller software. And I suppose I'll get back to everyone on that. But in the meantime, yeah, if this sounds familiar, please let me know. show@2.5admins.com.
Also, telling your devices not to randomize their MACs when they're on your home network is a great idea regardless, because, there may come a time that you would really like to figure out what's going on your network. And if all of your devices are lying to it constantly because they think that your network is a lying sack of crap and they don't want to give it any valid information, and it just looks like you've had a flood of 1,000 different devices on your network all day, every day, it's going to make that an awful lot harder if and when you actually want to start paying more attention to what's going on, or worse yet, what has been going on.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by 1Password. In a perfect world, end users would only work on managed devices with IT-approved apps. But every day, employees use personal devices and unapproved apps that aren't protected by MDM, IAM, or any other security tool. There's a giant gap between the security tools we have and the way we actually work. 1Password calls it the Access Trust Gap, and they've also created the first ever solution to fill it. 1Password Extended Access Management secures every sign-in for every app on every device. It includes the password manager you know and love, and the device trust solution you've probably heard of on this podcast back when it was called Collide. 1Password Extended Access Management cares about user experience and privacy, which means it can go places other tools can't, like personal and contractor devices. It ensures that every device is known and healthy, and every login is protected. So stop trying to ban BYOD or shadow IT and start protecting them with 1Password Extended Access Management. Support the show and check it out at onepassword.com/25A. Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to 2.5admins.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to send any questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Christian writes, Google recently sent out an email about them updating their terms of service. I have some domains with a catch-all, and I received 10 plus emails for accounts I do not own. How can someone create a Google account for an email address they do not own? There are too many for this to be an accident. What use is an account with an unconfirmed email address? How can I get rid of those accounts? Do I need to bother with them? I tried to recover the password for one of them, just so I can close the account, but at one point it asked for my phone number. I'm certainly not connecting that to an account that may have been used for something scammy. Also, I don't think this scales well for all the rest. Do you have the same problem, and how do you deal with it?
Now, I actually went back and forth with Christian on this question over email for a while, and what we uncovered was that Christian was not the first owner of that domain. And between the two of us, we decided the most likely explanation is whoever had the domain before he acquired it almost certainly had hooked it up to, Google Workspace or GUnit or whatever they were calling it that week. And so what he's dealing with is the remnants. Because, when you create those accounts, you absolutely have to be able to receive emails, at that inbox in order to be able to set that kind of thing up. And the answer to how you deal with it is generally going to be you already have to ignore so many useless bits of nonsense that come in on any given mailbox. Well, there's another one that you get to just ignore. Consider it like any other kind of phishing attempt or whatever, which you're going to have to deal with all those as well. So it's just one of the less malicious varieties of that as far as you're concerned.
The one I see more often is there's this one guy in the Philippines with a name similar to mine who doesn't seem to be able to type his email worth a damn and always types in my email address instead of his for Gmail. So I often get emails for ephemeral things he signed up for. He bought some things from some e-commerce site in the Philippines, or he created a new Facebook account. A couple of those I've bothered to go and actually reset the password and delete the Facebook account because I didn't want another Facebook account tied to my email address. But a lot of them I can't be bothered to deal with it. And so the initial confirmation email never gets confirmed and the account dies. But it happens a lot with people that just can't type worth a damn as well.
Well, I have a very old email address, a very old Gmail address, and I'm absolutely not going to tell you what it is, but it is, I guess, 2 common words, and it's the kind of nickname that you might have or give yourself. And I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of people who don't really understand how email works, and they just think that if they say that's their email, then that's their email. Because I would say probably at least once a month, I get someone signing up to Instagram or Snapchat or something with this email address. And I used to go in and mess with it and, change profile pictures and lock them out or delete accounts. And now I just mark as spam, just don't care, whatever.
Most likely those folks they're just trying to use it as a throwaway. They know it's not their address and they're not going to receive mail to it. They're just not clued in enough to realize that Instagram's not going to allow them to use that as their email address without actually clicking a thing that says, I received this email.
Or they just forgot to throw the extra numbers on the end of the fact that they actually have that email address, but with some extra numbers. And people are really bad at typing. There's a reason why so many websites want you to type your email address twice.
Yeah.
I had some old man buying really expensive things at Lowe's and putting in my phone number for the delivery, confirmation number for 15 years, man. It was 2 or 3 times a month. I get Lowe's calling me wanting to know when they can come deliver this guy's, $10,000 pre-built shed or, kitchen counters, this or that or the other. And it was just ugh. And there was nothing that I could actually do about it. You could, with great difficulty, get Lowe's to delete the number out of their database so that it wouldn't just automatically put that the next time you bought something. But every time I did that, he just put it right back in.
The question was he purposely trying to give them a bad phone number, or does he not know what his own phone number is and kicked 2 of the digits or something?
No, the guy was definitely just old and confused. I mean, there's absolutely nothing beneficial into putting the wrong phone number for who you called for the guys who have the thing that you bought in the truck to figure out how to get to your house. That's the only thing that number is for.
Yeah.
So if you didn't give them a number that you're answering, you're not getting your crap. I used to joke about I'm just going to start telling those guys, my address and they'll just bring me all his stuff. Unfortunately, that would be a crime. Whereas, him just getting me called by Lowe's, 2 or 3 times a week forever is not a crime. So I never actually did that. But just nothing you can really do about it.
We even had a case recently at my company. There's another company with a name that's our name plus an extra letter in the middle somewhere. That's a buy now, pay later e-commerce thing. But we got a whole rash of people one day all going on our contact form wanting refunds for shit they bought or whatever. And it's well, maybe call the company you bought it from, not us. It's our website definitely doesn't sell anything or look at all like the company you bought this stuff from, maybe have a clue?
It's adorable that you're assuming those were legitimate people who legitimately bought things they legitimately were owed money for. Because what that sounds like to me is a bunch of people got the bright idea, for some kind of scam on that site. And those people that were trying to follow the recipe to scam that site wound up on the wrong site.
Possibly.
It sounds an awful lot like when my consulting business had a Yellow Pages ad back in the day, which tells you how long I've been running my consulting business. And I would periodically get scammers calling, trying to convince me that I owed them a refund, for like the Dell laptop or whatever that I sold them. Not understanding that, yeah, I had a nice looking quarter page ad in the Yellow Pages and anybody can call, and I service business or residential back then. But that didn't change the fact that I knew all my customers. I don't even have to look at paperwork to know, did I sell this random person who sounds like they're calling from a trailer park a Dell laptop? No, I definitely didn't, and I don't owe them a damn thing. And so, you'd go through this and you'd be like, really, you bought a Dell laptop from me? Yeah, okay, when did you buy it? They think about it and make up a date, and they're trying to maintain the fake anger, and you'd be like, okay, who did you talk to? Who is your representative? Knowing that it's not really a thing, it would be me, and they make up another thing, and then finally you say, what was the name of the business you bought it from? And then you hear the panic set in, and you hear the paper crinkle as they're hurriedly flipping back, because they've just been doing this exact same thing on every computer services ad in the Yellow Pages, and they don't know which one they just called. So they start guessing names, just pack sand.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show@2.5admins.com if you want to send any questions or your feedback. You can find me at joerest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And I'm at Alan Jude.
We'll see you next week.